Those inducted into the Willcox Cowboy Hall of Fame represent the rugged lifestyle and the American spirit that has made America great. This Hall of Fame pays tribute to the many segments of the cattle industry. In 1983, 6 charter members were selected, and they stand proud of their individual achievements and yet humbled with their recognition.
Well, first of all, it started out as an economic development project. And finally, we were down to how do we promote Willcox and what makes Willcox different from every other small town in the world. And we kept getting the same answer. In fact, we'd done this 2 or 3 weeks. We kept getting the same answer. The difference is the people. The people here are different. And it just evolved that the people that we need to honor were the people that settled this valley, that made it what it was, and established what we call now the cowboy syndrome. And so it developed. But we were still sort of worrying about how we were going to do this and who were the people we were going to honor. It had been a real problem for me. I wasn't sure which way to go. Carl Clapp walked in and I was visiting with him and he said, "You need to do a Cowboy Hall of Fame." And I went, okay. And we put together a list of people to start with. And Carl was going to paint the original, he was going to paint the portraits. He wanted to do that. And he did for quite a while. He was very generous. He even did all the framing for the portraits. So Carl said, well, I'm not going to paint everybody all at once, but why don't you pick out 6? And they said, okay.
J.E. Ernest Browning. Ernest was born in 1899 in Elk, New Mexico, and arrived in Willcox to stay in 1917. In the early days, Ernest worked as a ranch hand, earning $40 a month, and he also worked at the Piggly Wiggly Market, eventually becoming the owner. In 1939, he was able to make ranching his only business when he obtained the High Lonesome Ranch, and then he added the Shilling Ranch in 1943, and in 1953 he traded for the Muleshoe Ranch. Ernest was very active on local and national issues.
Well, Granddad was such a dynamic person that he was known nationally. He was awarded the Silver Spur Award by several organizations. He promoted livestock and horses. He was a founding member of the Quarter Horse Association. He just spent his whole life working hard at doing that. And he went from being a grocery store man to being a rancher, a pretty good sized rancher. I think the ranch is 140 sections at the time.
Ernest spent quite a lot of time in the rodeo arena. He was able to enjoy team roping late into life.
I think one of the favorite things that I always think about is when Granddad was 79 years old, we went to the Roar's Rope-a-thon, which was one of the first biggest ropings in the country, and we were in the century rope, and I was roping in the century rope, and I actually have a picture of it. We ended up 4th in that, and they gave him a buckle to be the oldest man there.
J.E. Ernest Browning became an elder statesman that represented the cattle industry, quarter horses, and the Willcox Cowboy Hall of Fame with dignity and honor. Ernest Browning. Bill Busenbark. Bill, a rancher in the Pierce, Arizona area, was born in Tucson, Arizona, but brought to the Dos Cabezas as an infant and raised on the Rancho Zacatal. After he grew up, he ranched in the Kansas settlement until he opened his ranch in Pierce in 1953.
Well, he was an old-time rancher in the area. His family came in, the Busenbarks, the year the railroad came to Willcox. He was a cowboy, first of all, and then a rancher. His dad worked for 3C's, the Charical Cattle Company, and worked all over New Mexico and over to the San Pedro. So my dad learned the old-time cowboy way of doing things. He loved the land, he loved the animals. That was his life. He and my mother worked together pretty much as a team.
Bill said, in this business, you have to bend a little with the wind and draw in your belt every now and then, and you'd better have a strong constitution to keep you going. He was humbled to be part of the Willcox Cowboy Hall of Fame.
Well, I think he felt it was an honor. To be one of the charter members was pretty special. And I felt it was, we, the family, that it was well deserved because he was a true cowboy from the time he's probably 5 years old, and that was his entire life.
Bill said that life has been good. The life he chose brought him a wife who works side by side with him, a ranch he takes pride in, and surrounding countryside that he loved. Bill Busenbark. Ted Kortzen. Ted Kortzen came to Willcox, Arizona from Casa Grande, Arizona in 1952 and bought a ranch in the Circle I Hills. Ted was the kind of person that never met a stranger.
In short, Ted enjoyed life. In fact, he loved life. It didn't matter if Ted was working cattle, fixing water gaps, golfing, helping clubs in the community, like the Sheriff's Posse, the Elks Club. Ted loved people.
Ted especially liked the idea of ranching being a straight philosophy of neighbor helping neighbor. Ted knew there was more to being a cowboy than putting on a big hat and thinking you're ready to go. Being selected as a charter member of the Cowboy Hall of Fame meant something to Ted.
I believe Ted thought it was an honor to be selected. Ted wasn't much for recognition of himself, but I believe a big part of this was about him being honored to see the community start once again another institute, and it fit him real well being in the cattle ranching business.
He was a beloved member of the Willcox community and loved by all.
Since I was a little boy, I knew him as Uncle Ted. And I remember coming down here, staying with Uncle Ted. The brothers, including my father, would come down, whether it was for hunting or helping out. And I remember being in the community, and there were complete strangers that would call Ted Kortzen Uncle Ted. And as a young boy, it was a little confusing because I was wanting to know who that family member was. And as I got to spend more time here and along with Uncle Ted, I realized that was a term of endearment for Ted Kortzen.
Ted Kortzen. Ben Sanders. The Sanders family had homesteaded in Turkey Creek in 1892. For most of his life, Ben Sanders lived in the house where he was born. Ben and his wife Ethel made the most of their lives, raising cattle, chickens, and kids in the same house for years. Very few knew that Ben wrote poetry.
One of the things that I think that a lot of people never really knew about my father, that knew him but didn't realize, was my dad wrote a lot of poetry. And he wrote a lot of poetry about how he loved our mom, but he also wrote stories and made comments. He wrote articles and submitted them to the Arizona Range News way back in the day, like in the 50s. And he always signed them the Dusttown Wrangler.
Ben loved ranching and said he would be a ranching cowboy again if he had to do it all over again.
He was very proud to be selected to be part of the first group. He felt that it was an honor to his his parents and to also his siblings, of which there were 10 kids born on that mountain in the Chiricahuas. And so he really felt like that being selected was honoring his whole entire family.
Ben Sanders. Harry Summer. Harry Summer only had one real dream in life, and that was to own a little ranch. He was a humble man and really didn't understand why he was selected as a charter member.
At first, he didn't understand why they chose him, because he would say, I'm just a guy, and he'd always say with a little spread, that's blessed and fortunate enough to get to do what I love. So he said, why did they choose me? And he just didn't get it.
Harry had the unique ability to witch a well. With his fresh-cut mesquite fork, he could find water where others could not. And who knew that he had a sense of humor?
He had a really dry sense of humor. He was a lot of fun, but you would never know it just to look at him, because he didn't look like the type that would just crack up over things, but he was always just telling little dry humor jokes.
Harry Summer grew up with the ranch life. He always liked it, and he never wanted to do anything else.
He was one of the old ranchers around that had always been a rancher. He hadn't done anything else.
Harry Summer. Ray Ween. Ray Ween grew up in the Dos Cabezas Mountains in the shadows of the Central Copper Company, known today as the Mascot Mine.
Daddy embodied the spirit of the cowboy and always wanted to live the cowboy life. Even though he grew up around mining, it was when he had a chance, he was out on a mule or on a horse.
But sometimes those mules from the mine led Ray to some mischief.
I think probably my favorite story is he was born at the Mascot Mine, called Central Copper. And the mules that worked in the mine were brought out at night and left in a corral. And they were not mules that were ridden. But Daddy, as a young guy, and some of the other kids up at the Mascot would go and get a mule. And they would ride it, or they would try to ride it. It was pretty wild. They took a rope and roped it around an outhouse. And the mule took off and pulled the outhouse over. And the guard that took care of the mules never ratted those kids out.
Ray liked being a rancher and had no idea his work would lead him to the Cowboy Hall of Fame.
He was honored to be selected. He didn't ever seek the limelight, but he was just honored to be recognized by his peers.
He was honored and humbled, as you are not selected for who you are, but rather for what you do.
Well, you know, when you have an award that has been, you're selected by your peers, you know, that's not just a popularity contest.
Yeah.
It really means a lot.
Ray said, I can't think of a better way to live. Ray Ween. These charter members were ranching when cattle were sold by the head, and checking your cattle meant you were horseback. One of the unique aspects of the cattle business is how we're still linked together by a common bond known as the cowboy way of life. The original six: Ernest, Bill, Ted, Ben, Harry, and Ray. Thank you for leading the way.